everybody? I am Sora, and today I have the opportunity of breaking down my new song by myself.
Yeah, I'm by myself, and that little picture still sits on my shelf. And I sit around because I needed help. And I try my best, but it's bad for my health.
The main idea of this song that I wanted to go for, I've been listening to a lot of hyperpop in 2020. I wanted to try my own take on it. I wanted to keep it true to myself and still add elements from hyperpop and combine elements from the dubstep that I make, the more electronic stuff that I make. And I thought a good opportunity would be to add a lot of organic instruments as well as electronic instruments to kind of make a cohesive idea between the two of them. I think the most challenging part of this project was getting my vocals to sit above the mix while also making the rest of the elements in the song kind of pop through and give you that sense of electronic music. And I've never worked on vocal projects and just started getting into it recently, so that was probably my biggest battle. Anyways, let's just jump right into the song itself. I have a short 8-bar intro where I introduce some of the elements that are going to carry the song's tonality throughout. My favorite instrument to use was this marimba. Trying to get it to sound organic was insanely difficult, but I wanted to use real sounding instruments and have them contrast the electronic sounds pretty heavily. And then I have this vocal chop that I use throughout the entire song. In different sections it does different things, but for the most part in the beginning it just kind of sits in the background without any processing so that you can hear what it sounds like. This is the main melody. So one thing I've been doing recently in a lot of my music is making the intro really spacey and really washed out. All I did was I automated a reverb, made it super wet, and just progressively made it drier over 8 bars, and then brought in sign pluck for the first verse. So this is the first verse. This is where my vocals start coming in officially, and I have again these main melodies. I have my vocal chops in the background, I have this new introduced instrument, the sign pluck, and then as we go into the last 8 bars of the verse, going into the pre-chorus, I add back in the marimba and this bell up top here. So we have our little intro.
Every day feels the same now. I'm all on my own. Every day I feel drained now, and I wanna go home.
So the first 8 bars of the verse, not really too much going on, and that's how we want it. We want it to be pretty empty and just vocal centric so that you know this is a vocal song and my vocals will be the most important part of it. And it was really important to establish the importance of my vocals here. So I wanted to introduce the elements and then immediately take them away so that the vocals were at the forefront and would stay at the forefront as I start adding the instruments in for more energy. Towards the second half of the verse, I add in the marimba again, I add in the bell sound, I also add in a little synth bass, little respace, very quietly, as well as a cello and some strings and a flute. And then I have the first taste of some real heavy electronic stuff that comes back later on in the song. I have a little lead in with this little electro arp. In context, you'll hear the energy start to build pretty heavily, but not too heavily. I want everything to focus its attention to the first chorus. So pacing in this song was extremely difficult because, you know, with dubstep, normally it's just like 8-bar intro or 16-bar intro and like a really heavy build immediately after. And it's just like all the energy gets funneled into the build for the big payoff. Writing pop-centric, vocal-centric stuff just isn't the same. So adding energy without adding too much over the span of 24 bars or whatever was probably my biggest challenge, because again, you don't want anything to overtake the vocals, but you do want to have this sense of build without it being too driven. So I added some instruments and I added back the main melodies, and I'll just play it so that you can hear what I'm talking about.
Now I spend my days riding these sandstones, but you were chilling, God, I'm on my own.
So a trick that I used to break the tension that's being built with all of the instruments being added was this sort of sigh of relief where everything gets cut out at the last bar, and then I have this lead in with this marimba. Now instead of using velocity controls like a real instrument would, I just used an auto filter, so it's being low passed, and if I pull up the automation here you'll see it ramps up right at that tail end to bring bring in the next section. I don't want to use too many risers. I don't want to use any drums yet. I just want it to be known that a new section is coming. And in order to do that, I just made this little marimba thing. And then the marimba comes back in full power. We have a bass that gets added that's pretty strong, a little bit pluck here. And that's meant to carry the rhythm of the song. Now we have some actual rhythm here without adding too much drum-wise. I do believe that we have a clap underneath as well to have it be like a 4 count, and then the bass kind of works against it. Energy starts to ramp up a lot here, and if I just play it out, you'll hear.
I let my problems get the best of me, and I'm guessing that's why you're no longer next to me. I'm always still like this was destiny. Hey, you don't want no smoke, so why you testing me?
So for the first 16 here of the verse, we have that clap and that bass pluck, and then as we go into it, the clap starts ramping up, and you can start to hear different patterns. I have this little break sample that starts to come in, and then I have some risers here that really lead into the chorus big time. So I want my vocals start getting more present, they start getting louder, I start getting more energetic along with the song, which more elements come in, the vocal chop becomes more present, everything just gets more energy, it starts to come more in the forefront to guide you into this really powerful chorus that I wanted to go into.
And all my nights feel so long, and now I'm still thinking about where I went wrong. I can't trust your decisions, it's taking too long. I'm stuck in my wall, wait on your call.
So again, I wanted to fuse the idea of like vocal pop-centric style of music with the vocals being at the forefront and the most important, but I did want it to be more electronic in nature, and a good way to do that without having like any sort of drop is just to use the same techniques. So I have a build-up that just is softer than normal. It's not no heavy snares or big kicks or anything, but it is still ramping up. So I have this clap here and these risers. You can tell this sounds very EDM. This sounds very electronic. Ton of energy being built here. And then a cutoff to again remind you that this is a vocal song. And I have my vocal here, big sigh of relief before the drop. My vocals get completely soloed, everything else gets turned off for the most part, and it's just my vocals. Then we have the drop, the chorus. And for this, I pretty much took everything out except for that main melody with the little sign pluck, the marimba, and the vocal chop. That's all that's going on. And then we have this big, massive 808 that's being distorted to hell underneath it. Let's play it in context.
Wait on your call. Yeah, I'm by myself, and that little picture still sits on my shelf, and I sit around because I need help.
So we have our first taste of drums here. Got this really powerful kick and this very powerful like rim shot snare, as well as another snare layer that's very Islander feel at first is what I got from it. I have the shakers, I have these weird like percussive drums, and on top of everything we have the vocal chops like slamming into chorus, as well as my vocals. So it's just like, in order to keep it from being too busy, took almost every element out. So now we only have about like 3 or 4 instruments playing, the 808, vocal chops, and then that main melody that I wanted carried as well. Other than that, it's pretty empty. My vocals are doing most of the work here. My vocals are heavily compressed at this point, so they're just in your face, and that's what I wanted.
Yeah, I'm by myself, and that little picture still sits on my shelf, and I sit around because I need help, and I try my best, but it's bad for my health.
And to break the monotony for the second half of the chorus, I added some more drums.
Yeah, I'm by myself, and that little picture still sits on my shelf, and I sit around because I need help, and I try my best, but it's bad for my health.
And then I have everything washed out for the transition into the B section of the song, which is the more electronic section. So I have my vocals here.
Yeah, I'm by myself, and that little picture still sits on my shelf.
And Ulusile actually gave me this tip for the chorus specifically. So as you know, in Ableton there is an offset function that you can use to shift your sample or MIDI clip by the millisecond value, and his idea was to pan copies of the chorus hard left and hard right and shift them ever so slightly to give this like really full, almost chorusy effect without using chorus. So we have our main vocal, the actual lead vocal in the chorus. So we have our main vocal, which is right in the middle, and it's being processed so that it's not completely in the middle, but for the most part all I have on this chain is auto-tune. I have a gate because I have a lot of room tone where I record. I have an EQ to cut out some ugly low end that I don't need, as well as control some of the high end. I learned that in hip hop, you want your vocals to be super compressed and almost have no dynamic range, because hip hop instrumentals and pop instrumentals normally are very heavy and very loud. So in order to combat that, you have to compress the hell out of your voice. So I have another EQ here to cut out more low end and control some of the mids, and then another compressor to kind of flatten everything out again. So we caught our peaks with the first compressor, and then to chunk everything out and make everything pretty static and not very dynamic, we have another compressor. I have a de-esser because my microphone really hammers in those like high 2K, 3K frequencies when you so I have a de-esser to catch those and compress them down. I have an OTT for no other reason than it sounds good. OTT on vocals has always sound good, and I feel like that's a bad habit from making EDM music. But yeah, I have an OTT to really make it shine. It makes the vocals a lot brighter and again kills the dynamics on them. Another EQ to cut out frequencies that come back from the compression. All the compression will bring all those bad frequencies back, so you got to control them again. Some chorus for a little tiny bit of width, and then I have these racks here that I made. I have a reverb rack. It's basically just parallel compression within Ableton. I have a completely dry rack with no reverb, and then I have the same signal 100% wet on the reverb. And then I have another cleanup EQ to really control those piercing sounds up in fucking between 2 and 10K, and to cut out any low end that comes through at the very end of it. I have another EQ, some more compression, some more delay and reverb that I automate at certain parts of the song for transitional purposes. So these delays and this reverb normally sit at 0, and then when I want to wash everything out at the end of a verse or at the end of a chorus, I'll bring it back in at the very end. So yeah, that's my vocal processing. It's way too involved and honestly could be trimmed down quite a bit, but I'm still learning as I go how to process my vocals. And this was a preset that I made from scratch that it works in context for me, and I could definitely do a lot better, but I'm still learning. And yeah, the main point that I've learned from any vocalist that I've talked to so far is to find a preset that works for yourself. You can go through and try to mimic how other people sound, how other vocalists sound, but everybody's voice is different, everybody's microphone is different, nothing's gonna sound the same in context. Every beat's gonna be different, and how they're mixed is going to be different as well. So really finding a vocal preset that will work most occasions that you can tweak, it sounds good with your voice and your current setup, is very important.
Yeah, I'm by myself, and that little picture still sits on my shelf.
So at the end of this chorus, very short chorus, we have this transition. I reused the same idea from the intro, just wash everything out and bring it back to dry towards the end, and then the iconic Yosh sample. But if I play it, I wanted this to be like two sides of the same coin. It's still the same song, but a completely different energy, a completely different feel to it towards the end. And I wanted to remind people like, hey, I am still an electronic artist. I am still making electronic music. And I felt like this was a good opportunity to combine the two, but make them contrast almost entirely. Like, they work together, but they are completely different from one another. And so this is the lead into that. Again, it's just same melody, lots of reverb, going back to dry, and I have this little glitch to let you know, like, hey, here's the EDM part. Have another build up, same drums being used, same samples being used for the risers and stuff, shout out Virtual Riot. And then we have this synth section with all these leads and plucks and stuff that come in like super heavy. Y'all know me, I'm a really big fan of using ARPs. I'm also a big fan of that sigh of relief, but here it gets glitched to hell, and I'll play it in context and then solo out what I'm doing. So that effect coming right before the drop is this plugin called Glitch. Been using this for a long time. It's got some very amazing presets and a very I'm sure that y'all have seen it, but basically it's like Effectrix, or it's like a sequencer that has all of these different effects, and then as you can see, you can randomize it, you can mutate it, change the sequence of the stuff, you can change how the effects are. If I go into effects here, you can see that the effects themselves are changing, like the values, the knobs are changing, and you can get some really cool stuff. And I found this preset hit random a few times, and it gives this effect on the ARPs that come in for the electronic section. Basically repeating the same sample, adding noise and distortion right at the end of the build up to introduce the heavy section. So my idea for this was to gradually transition from the more organic side of the song, the more natural sounding instruments, to almost completely electronic, way too heavy, super compressed, super loud, super energetic. All I did was I filtered out the marimba and that sine lead and filtered in the really heavy ARP stack that I have here. Leads are playing together. The marimba almost entirely goes away. And here I use my vocals for the vocal track. So I have a different set of processing for this, but basically it's the same rack with an EQ to give it that telephone effect, and then Saturn for distortion to make it sound like a guitar. I play it in context. Or without context, this is what it sounds like. And it's meant to sit in the background and complement the electronic stuff that's going on here. I also switched out the 808, gave it some heavier drum samples with way too much distortion. I use glitch a lot here in this section, so every time that there's a soft break in the electronic stuff, I'm adding elements, automating the glitch to turn back on and off. And at the same time, another thing that I wanted to do was give some subtle callbacks to the original A section of the song. And to do that, I have the bell, or the marimba, and I reversed it and made these little break sections where the marimba and the bell come through. The only reason I really added them was because I wanted the electronics section to be super stuttery and super choppy so that it felt more robotic. And in order to fill the spaces, I felt like it would be a good idea to add elements that I used from the beginning of the song to make everything more cohesive in a way. You can also see the vocal chop I've been using this whole time is now super distorted, got a lot of OTT, telephone effect, almost no reverb whatsoever. There's no space to it. It's completely dry. Again, same idea for my vocals up here that I did. It's just they play at the same time. And then to round everything out, to calm everything down, I had that main melody back, that main sine plug that I have. And the idea here again was to give you, even for the outro, big contrast between the first part of it being very subtle, very quiet, very chill, and then I glitched the hell out of that chill sound to make it super robotic and electronic-y. That's the main theme for the song entirely, was just combining the two and making sure that they contrast each other a lot, but not too much, so that you get this sense of there's two things going on at once and two things within the same song. But yeah, that is pretty much it. That is the arrangement and some of the processing that went into by myself. I hope you learned a thing or two, and I hope you enjoyed the song. Thanks again to Halcyon for having me on the comp and letting me do this breakdown video, and thank you all for listening. Till next time.
Halcyon.